order is going to go solvency. Then we're going to go the thing that he talked about where we kind of apply to both the Coast Guard working with others, whatever that flow was.
So oceans.
Yeah, oceans. Okay, and then after that we're going to go to politics.
Is that it?
Yeah, cool. Very good.
So solvency, oceans, politics.
Okay. On the solvency flow, the first argument it makes is that we aren't specific to the none of our evidence was specific to the Coast Guard, and we can't spike out of that by saying the Department of Defense doesn't necessarily work. They didn't ever respond to the warrants of Zach's guards. All they did was worm their way out of every piece of evidence that Zach read that didn't say Coast Guard, but merely the governing body of the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard can't function, can't utilize its funds appropriately if the governing body, the thing that governs it, does not use the fund or does not appropriate the funds responsibly. If the Department of Defense can't fail or can't work, then neither from the Coast Guard if it falls under the same category. They never responded to anything that Zach read. They simply said the Coast Guard does not fall under the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense governs all the United States military. Secondly, he dropped on the flow the fact that prioritizing war is bad, or prioritizing war is bad. Extend through our impacts, evaluate them just as much as anything they read. At the point in time when they dropped their paradigm of only evaluating human trafficking and dehumanization over everything else, our war impacts still outweigh. We can still claim these through the Kerry-Lugar Act, which once again they dropped another unique impact. I'll get to that more in the Kerry-Lugar flow. Secondly, they still minimize oil, regardless of the fact if they say mix is a key. They don't ever advocate the shift away from oil at all. I agree, mix is a key, but at the point in fact when they're still reliant on diesel fuel, they still link into the oil perception, the oil dependence. The solvency flow flows neg. We're going to move to the oceans. Ocean/D, whatever you floated as, the argument that applies to both. The thing you put on that was that the Coast Guard is key to solvency. He pointed out the Coast Guard stops a lot of ships and is uniquely key to solving. He never really responded to the fact that the Coast Guard can't solve without the other nations interfering. Coast Guard works with a lot of other agencies. Their own evidence says so. If the Coast Guard can't work with these other agencies, they won't be effective by themselves. The fact that they can do things like within the Coast Guard is purely dependent on the fact that they have other governing bodies, other foreign nations that back them up with additional help if they needed. The Coast Guard is left to stand on its own through the affirmative plan. There's no way they can claim the solvency that they necessarily want to. Let's move on to politics, specifically the dropped impact on the genocide debate, or poverty debate. He didn't pull through at all on the poverty flow. The fact that Zach's analysis on the McGuire 95 part that said the poverty is the most important issue in today's debate round. By ignoring the poverty issue, you don't address the most important structural violence that's going on, and that is poverty. He didn't pull that through on the flow at all. The poverty impact flows negative. Kerry-Lugar is the only thing in today's debate preventing poverty. At the point in time when we win the Kerry-Lugar flow, we're the only ones accessing solving the structure of violence that is poverty. He didn't pull that through in the flow that neg. Okay, first on the politics flow. Yes, if the Coast Guard seems to lead them, they can't deter overfishing and trafficking. The Coast Guard is not necessarily the perception of leader. This is on the perception of leadership. Sorry, the argument that. Kerry-Lugar's key to the United States hedge takes out the Coast Guard efficiency. If the Coast Guard is seen as a leader that can't deter fishing or trafficking, at the point in time when the United States leadership goes down, they mishandle this argument. It just said it doesn't apply because the Coast Guard doesn't follow the United States leadership. If the United States can't lead, the Coast Guard doesn't have efficiency. They won't be seen as nearly the leader they are right now, working with these other agencies that they talked about in their own specific evidence. Secondly, on the poverty, more on the poverty. Our poverty outweighs all of the impacts. They never answered this. Our poverty impacts outweighs. It's much more extreme and disad and genocidal. Kerry-Lugar would prevent both their impacts and solve for the poverty. Vote neg on the politics disad purely for the fact that they didn't address this, the fact that we can solve for both of their impacts with the addition of poverty. Third, preventing nuclear war extinction prevents all humanization. Extends Zach's 1NR evidence. Next on the flow, says Obama, we never conceded on the flow that Obama is putting healthcare at the top of his agenda. Zach addressed that in his last speech with analysis that said the first thing at the top of the agenda that needs to be passed is the Kerry-Lugar Act. Healthcare is not at the top of Obama's agenda. Additionally, on the climate change legislation, they mishandled this as well. They didn't read the own contextual evidence that they read. Obama might be pushing climate change, but their own evidence was talking about a cap and trade policy, which is extremely different from anything that they're saying. At the point in time when there no link evidence on the climate change policy, it isn't necessarily what they want you to believe, and you have to err negative. extend on the flow the fact that the Greenhawks don't necessarily matter. The Department of Energy is using alternative energy now. Next, it won't distract. Excuse me. Okay, on the climate, it won't distract. Our evidence Our evidence is key, and passage must come before the climate change and the status quo. This is just saying the Cure League needs to pass before climate change. Their own evidence is mishandled. They can't access any of their impacts without support from the government. Pakistan needs the unconditional aid that only the Cure League Act can provide. Political capital is key, and Obama needs his political capital and impact. We outweigh extinction by worth, most dehumanizing impact. You must vote negative to prevent this before anything. Cooking oil.
We got 249.